They will be in English, so I'm sorry, but it was in English prepared. So we'll be talking about whole brain emulation, review of assumptions. And it doesn't show the whole slide. Czekaj. Może to i tyle. This is better. So what we'll be talking about, assumptions behind the whole brain emulation concept by Sandberg and Bostrom. And what is whole brain emulation, or WBE? It's so-called conceptual technology. What is conceptual technology? It's a technology that doesn't exist yet, and there is no clear path to achieve it. Yeah. So it's strange, like it's kind of funky. No, it's not, because most of the technologies in the future are in this stage, like AGI, artificial general intelligence, or superintelligence, or HLMI, which is human-level machine intelligence, or XAI, which is explainable. Those are all conceptual technologies because they do not exist yet, and we are not sure how to achieve it. So is it complete science fiction? Not necessarily, because on one hand, all technologies that we have right now, at one stage, they were in mythical phase of conceptual technologies. So dismissing this idea is not necessarily correct. On the other hand, in recent brain studies or studies of artificial intelligence, we see more and more kind of like a proof that whole brain emulation, as proposed by Sandberg-Bostrom, is not going to make it. Okay, so so this whole brain emulation stuff by Bostrom is kind of like in between. So what is whole brain emulation? Whole brain emulation technology recreates fully functional brain. So the whole brain emulation brain is not functionally distinguishable from normal brain, biological brain. And we have to say that for Bostrom and Sandberg, the brain and the mind are actually the same, they are synonymous. So exact emulation of the brain is also exact emulation of the mind. And they also qualify this by saying that the whole brain emulation is one-to-one model of the brain function. It produces phenomenologic effect of the mind. It behaves the same way as original brain. So it is full recreation of the mind. That's what they say. And they also add to it, why not? This counts for free, you know. The whole brain emulated brain is truly conscious in the same way as a normal person is. It will produce subjective mental states of the same kind that would have been produced in particular emulated brain. And even further, they are adding that whole brain emulation is correctly described as continuation or origin of the original brain. It has kind of like an interesting aspect to it, because people say that whole brain emulation is the way to eternity, because you can copy your brain and it will be exactly the same as your brain in your brain, and you can live forever. But think about this, you will be living on the hard drive somewhere. What kind of life it is? But anyway, some people think about this. So is it feasible, even if it is technical, theoretical theology? What does it mean that, according to Bostrom, there is no obvious technological roadblock preventing this technology to be realized? Well, let's look at exactly what they are saying. No obvious technological roadblock, close reading. What it exactly means? It means that we don't know how to do it, we don't know what technology is needed to do it, and we don't know what kind of technology would be needed. It means there is no technological roadblock because we have absolutely no information, no knowledge how to do it. But it also means that there is no logical contradiction to the claim that it could be done. But I want to sensitize you to this, that being logically possible to being technically feasible is a long way. It doesn't come by itself. So there is more enigma to this proposal. We do not understand how the brain functions, how it generates conscious state. We have theories. We do not understand what is the mind or how the mind functions. We have theories. Our current model of the brain are probably incorrect, that's what they say. And if someone has any hopes that GPT-4, deep neural networks, LLM models, which is large language models, I kind of model the brain, they are for big surprise, they are not. They are abstractions. Plus, there are things we do not know yet. They are famous unknown. And what are assumptions behind realization of whole brain emulation? And there are 8 assumptions, and we go over them. And they are conditions sine qua non to do them. So that's why they are important, because according to Sandberg and Bostrom, we have to have those conditions satisfied to realize whole brain emulation. So, but we have to kind of like realize that, okay, whole brain emulation is a concept beyond what Sandberg and Bostrom said, yeah, because they had like these 8 assumptions, and some of them may not be satisfied, and probably they are not. So, whole brain emulation is that? Not necessarily. It's whole brain emulation in Bostrom edition. So the first assumption is that it's called limited physicalism, meaning that the most mental functions are based on physical phenomena. Also, Sandberg, Bostrom do not explain what does exactly mean, what it means. It means that the brain functions must exist something in some physical construct. So it is against the idea that mind and brain are something, separate, that the mind is some separate substance. It's against, dual brain, Descartes. So that's what the first assumption is about. The second assumption is that there is a multiple realizability of the brain function. It means that, okay, we have this brain-mind thing in biological construct, like in the brain, but we can lift functions of the brain consciousness somewhere else and put it like, I don't know, in silicon, or put it in some kind of artificially created biological stuff, and it will be doing the same thing. So this assumption of multiple realizability, meaning the same mental properties can be implemented in different physical substrate. The third assumption is that relevant functions of the brain are Turing compatible. What does it mean, Turing compatible? Turing compatible means that they operate like Turing machines. And what operates like Turing machines? Well, this computer, because it is Turing machine. So, Bostrom claims with Sandberg that our higher cognitive functions operate on the systems like Microsoft Windows. There is no difference in actual implementation. In case of emulated brain, the software will be more complicated. but it will come down to PC. So that's what he's saying. The first assumption is that we can do whole brain emulation without understanding how brain works. Interesting, yeah? But so how will you emulate something you don't know how it works? But that's the assumption. And I'm showing you how shifty or how risky or fuzzy those assumptions are. The fifth assumption is that whole brain emulation requires simulation of only certain level of the brain functions. But look back at the assumption that we don't need to understand how the brain is working. And then the next assumption is that, okay, we emulate only part of the brain function. But if we don't know how the brain operates, how do we say which part we have to emulate if we don't know what parts are composed of? And the sixth assumption is that the emulation level, the functions of the simulated components are understood. So it contradicts, again, two previous requirements. The seventh assumption is that the emulated level simulated components can be realized in operational computer, which is the repetition of the claim that it is Turing computable. And the last assumption is that whole brain emulation must reproduce brain functions, not necessarily all the bodily functions. So how do you explain this or translate this into some kind of meaning? Is that whole brain emulation doesn't require embodied brain. Okay? You can just lift the stuff out of the head and run it. Okay. So what those are 8 assumptions, and I said those are conditions sine qua non of realizing this. So you saw according to Bostrom, the whole brain emulation technology satisfies those assumptions, and you can emulate the brain, or it doesn't, and you can't. So let's look exactly at what he's claiming. So Bostrom assumes that whole brain emulation, it's not necessary in this case to completely emulate physical structure of the brain on all the levels. Okay? So we can look on your part of the brain and emulate this. There is no need to emulate all the brain processes responsible for bodily functions. They can be omitted, yeah? But this, if you think about it, assumes that we understand how all the functions of the brain are related, and we can leave those functions that we like and leave everything that we don't. Furthermore, the medium is not important in which you emulate the brain. And it created a wake of papers that, you can emulate the brain and put it on the USB drive or somewhere else. And you can have your wife or your mother or your mother-in-law like in the USB stick. This is good actually, because if you don't like to talk to her, you can just plug it off. Yeah. So there is this crazy technology, but logically it leads to these conclusions. Why not? Yeah. Your mother-in-law on USB stick, still better than alive sometimes. But we have some new observations about the brain, which makes the Bostrom idea of whole brain emulation more elusive than it was before. The studies show that brain at the level of neuronal connections is a dynamic structure that constantly changes. And I will explain what impact it has on the whole brain emulation. And we also know that sensory deprivation of the brain leads to serious malfunction, so you cannot have disconnected brain working correctly. So dynamic brain structure, there is a book by Eagleton, the 2 or 3 books about, he's writing about this, that brain is a dynamic system constantly altering its own circuitry to match the demand of the environment and capabilities of the bodies. Those changes occur hourly. So if Bostrom is saying, okay, we can lift up brain by modeling the structure of the neuronal circuits, well, what kind of structure he is talking about is this structure is dynamic. Well, my brain is probably different when I came here than now, because the brain neuronal connection changes, as I said, hourly. So Bostrom is wrong, simply. You cannot do the scan of the neuronal connections and model this somewhere in silicon and have the brain. It doesn't add up. So one of the assumptions that he has is already knocked out. As I said, what kind of structure mapping of the brain would monitor, would recreate? If there is no structure, this is static. So sensory deprivation, whole brain emulation postulate disconnected brain. Okay? We lift the brain, we put it on USB drive, like Microsoft Windows operating system, because he's talking about software, and we have it. Complete emulation of phenomenology or experience, subjective, we have it. But the research indicates that brain cannot function without input from sensory system. But he's saying in requirement A, whole brain emulation doesn't require full embodied system. So he's wrong. Sensory deprivation leads to mental disorder, hallucinations, eventually permanent brain damage. And if you read some of the history, one of the treatment in Guantanamo Bay, I know everyone knows it, or it doesn't, was sensory deprivation. And people went mad. And changes in the brain were permanent. So as Eagleman is saying, without proper and continuous world experience, the brain becomes malformed and pathological. So, conclusions. Whole brain emulation is rather a relation of the relates on 8 assumptions. The proposed whole brain emulation model seems to contradict the recent finding about the dynamic neuronal structure of the brain and requirements of body-brain integration. The 8 tentative assumptions plus recent finding make the whole brain emulation concept rather idea more in techno-fantasy than a technical project. But you remember what is Rutherford moonshine? In 1936, Rutherford, which was the most famous guy in atomic physics at that time, said, talking about atomic energy is a moonshine. In 3 days, they came up with the solution, with concept of the fusion. So I say something that seems completely impossible. You know, I'm not saying that we want to have it or we don't want to have it. It's like talk about possibility. Maybe someday realize it. So the question that I want to leave you with is whether whole brain emulation is rather for moonshine, considering that his 8 sine qua non assumptions are violated, and the realities of research shows that, you know, if we want to emulate the brain, the Bostrom way is not the proper direction. Thank you very much.